The queen's tears. The courtyard of the palace was still trembling with noise. Whispers turned into arguments, arguments into shouts. The people could not believe what their eyes were seeing. The princess, lost for so many years, was alive. That was a miracle in itself. But with her, standing like a shadow, was something even stranger. A human child. The queen held her daughter tightly, refusing to let go. Her arms shook as if she feared her child would vanish again like smoke. For years, the queen had mourned her daughter. She had lit candles in temples, prayed to the stars, and cried in silence when no one could see her. Now, after so much pain, the princess was here kneeling before her. "Daughter," the queen whispered again, tears running down her cheeks. "You are alive. The stars have given you back to me." The princess closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against her mother's shoulder. "I never thought I would see home again," she said, her voice weak but full of emotion. "I never thought I would feel your arms again." The crowd softened for a brief moment, touched by the reunion. But then their eyes returned to the small boy. He was holding tightly to the princess's hand, his small fingers clinging with fear. His wide human eyes looked around at the angry faces, and his lips trembled as if he wanted to cry but forced himself to stay strong. The nobles were the first to break the silence. "This cannot be allowed," one shouted. His jeweled robe shimmered in the torchlight as he pointed at the child. "The princess has returned, yes. But why has she brought this creature into the heart of our kingdom? Humans are our enemies," another said coldly. "How dare she defile our palace with one of their kind?" The boy hid behind his mother's dress. The princess turned, shielding him with her body like a protective wall. Her eyes burned with anger at the noble's words, but her lips trembled with fear for her son. The queen looked down at the boy. Her heart felt torn in two. She wanted to embrace her daughter again and never let go. But every time she looked at the child, doubt filled her soul. Could she accept this human? Could she accept him as blood of her blood? "Who is he?" the queen finally asked, her voice heavy with pain. "Daughter, why is he with you?" The princess took a deep breath. Her voice shook, but she stood taller, placing her hand on the boy's head. "He is my son," she said firmly. The words fell like thunder. The courtyard shook with outrage. Soldiers stepped back in disbelief, and the nobles began shouting at once. "Impossible!" One cried. "This is betrayal!" Yelled another. The queen's eyes widened. Her tears froze on her cheeks. "Your son?" she whispered. The princess nodded, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. "Yes, my son. His name is Kale. He is half human, and half of me." Gasps filled the night air. Some citizens covered their mouths in shock, while others spat on the ground in disgust. The queen staggered backward, her legs trembling. She nearly fell, and only the arms of her guards kept her standing. Her crown tilted, shining under the torches, but her face was pale as moonlight. The princess reached forward, her voice breaking. "Mother, please. Listen to me. He is not a curse. He is not a threat. He is my child, your grandson." The word grandson struck the queen's heart like a blade. She stared at the boy, who looked back at her with innocent eyes. For a moment she saw not an enemy, not a human, but a child. Small, helpless, afraid. Just a boy who wanted to be loved. The queen's lips trembled. She wanted to step forward to touch him, to see if he was real. But then the angry shouts of her people filled her ears again. "Exile them both," one noble roared. "Lock the child away." Another demanded, "They shame the throne." The queen closed her eyes, her heart torn apart. Duty pulled her one way, love pulled her another. She could not think. She could not breathe. The princess dropped to her knees, clutching her son to her chest. Tears rolled down her face as she cried out, "Mother, please do not take him from me. He is all I have left. If you reject him, you reject me too." The courtyard grew silent. Every eye turned back to the queen, waiting for her decision. Her chest rose and fell as she fought her emotions. She was not just a mother. She was a queen. Her people demanded strength, demanded purity, demanded tradition. But her heart cried for her child, for her daughter, for the years lost in sorrow. Slowly she walked forward. Each step echoed in the courtyard like thunder. The princess held her breath, terrified of what her mother would say, of what she might do. The queen stopped in front of them. She looked at her daughter, then at the child. Her hands trembled as she reached out. The boy flinched, pressing closer to his mother. The queen's tears fell again. She touched the boy's face softly, brushing away his fear. For a heartbeat, the world froze. "You are my blood," she whispered. Her voice cracked like breaking glass. "No matter what you are made of, you are my blood." The princess broke into sobs, holding her son tighter. The boy's eyes filled with confusion, then relief as the queen's hand rested gently on his hair. But behind them, the noble's eyes burned with anger. They did not accept this. They would not forgive this. Their whispers grew darker, plotting in the shadows of the courtyard. And while mother and daughter wept together, the future of the kingdom shifted silently, like a storm rising beyond the horizon. The mysterious return. The night was quiet in the capital city of the alien kingdom. Stars shone brightly above the tall towers, and the streets were filled with silence. Guards stood watch on the palace walls, their eyes sharp, their weapons ready. Nothing unusual had happened for months. The city was at peace until the alarm bells rang. From the skies, a small ship appeared. Its surface was burned and cracked as if it had survived many battles. Smoke trailed behind it as it descended slowly. People came out of their homes and shops, pointing to the sky. Children clutched their mothers' hands, and whispers filled the air. "Who dares land without permission?" one soldier shouted. The ship touched down on the landing field near the palace gates. Its door opened slowly, creaking as if it had not been used in years. Every soldier raised their weapon, ready to strike at any intruder. Then a figure stepped out. The crowd gasped. It was a woman, tall, elegant, with silver markings on her skin. Her clothes were torn, her steps weak, but her face was unforgettable. Gasps turned to shouts as people recognized her. "It is her," someone cried. "The queen's daughter, the lost princess." The news spread like fire through the crowd. Years ago, during the Great War, the princess had vanished. Everyone believed she was dead. Songs of mourning had been sung for her. Temples had been built in her memory. Now here she was, standing alive at the palace gates. The soldiers lowered their weapons, stunned into silence. But then, another figure appeared from the ship. A small child stepped out, clutching the woman's hand tightly. His hair was dark, his skin soft, and his eyes bright with fear. He was not like the aliens. He was human. The whispers grew louder, turning into shocked cries. "A human child." One soldier spat, "How can this be?" Another hissed. The princess held the boy protectively, wrapping her arm around him. He looked up at her with trust, unaware of the anger in the eyes around them. The palace gates opened, and the queen herself walked out, surrounded by her royal guards. She wore her crown, her long robes flowing like rivers of light. Her face was stern, but her eyes widened the moment she saw her daughter. The queen froze. Her hands trembled. For a heartbeat, she looked like a mother, not a ruler. "Daughter," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The princess's lips quivered. Tears filled her eyes. She fell to her knees, bowing her head low. "Mother," she cried, her voice breaking, "I have returned." The queen rushed forward, breaking the dignity of her throne. She fell beside her daughter and pulled her into an embrace. Tears streamed down her face as she held her child after so many lost years. The people, seeing their ruler weep, fell silent. But their silence did not last. Their eyes moved again to the boy. "The human child, why does she have him?" someone muttered. "Is this human her servant?" "Hurt the son?" another asked. The whispers turned sharp, filled with suspicion. To them, humans were enemies, creatures of war and destruction. How could the princess of their people stand side by side with one? Worse, how could she bring one into the sacred palace grounds? The queen looked at the boy, her tears fading into confusion. The child hid behind the princess's torn dress, clutching her leg. He looked frightened, but he did not let go. His small hand refused to release her. The queen's voice was low, trembling with both love and doubt. "My daughter, what is this?" she asked. The princess lifted her head, her face pale but her eyes strong. "This is my child," she said softly. Her voice echoed in the silence of the courtyard. "He is my son." The crowd erupted. Gasps, cries, and shouts filled the night. Nobles shouted in anger. Soldiers muttered in disbelief. Mothers pulled their children closer, as if the boy was a danger to them. The queen staggered back, her crown shaking on her head. Her eyes widened as she looked again at the child, her grandson born of human blood. The boy, sensing the fear and hate around him, buried his face in his mother's dress. He did not speak. He did not cry, but his small body shook with fear. The princess held him tighter. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained firm. "Mother," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, listen to me. There is more to tell. Much more." The queen looked between her daughter and the child. Her heart ached with joy and fear all at once. She had her daughter back. But the mystery of this child, this human, hung heavy in the air. The crowd pressed closer, demanding answers. Soldiers looked uncertain, their weapons half raised. Nobles shouted for explanations. The night air grew thick with tension, as if the kingdom itself was holding its breath. And above it all, the stars watched silently, as the fate of two worlds began to change at the palace gates. The daughter's story, the queen's trembling hand rested on the boy's hair. Her touch was soft, but her eyes were filled with storms. The courtyard was silent except for the sound of her daughter's sobs. The people held their breath, waiting. The nobles whispered behind jeweled sleeves, their faces sharp with judgment. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, not knowing where loyalty should fall, toward their queen or toward the anger of tradition. At last, the queen lifted her gaze. Her voice was heavy as stone. "Daughter, you must tell us everything. How did you survive? Where have you been all these years? And how," she glanced at the child, "did this come to be?" The princess closed her eyes, clutching her son tightly. She had known this moment would come. Slowly she stood, her shoulders straight though her body trembled. She turned to the crowd, to the nobles, to her mother. Her voice, though soft, carried in the still air. "It began on the night of the war," she said. The people leaned forward. The war was still a wound in their memory. That was the night she had vanished, the night her name had turned into a dirge of mourning. "I was captured," she continued, "taken by enemies who wished to break the queen's heart and used me as a weapon. They locked me in a dark prison, far away from home. Days turned into months, and I thought I would die in chains." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their heads in shame. They had believed their princess had died bravely. They had not imagined her suffering. But fate, she said, her voice trembling, had other plans. Her eyes grew distant as memory pulled her away. One night the prison was attacked. A battle raged above and the wall shook. I thought it was the end. And then a man came, a human soldier. His uniform was torn, his body was bleeding, but his eyes were filled with fire. The boy's small hand squeezed hers as if he too could see the picture in her mind. "He broke my chains," the princess whispered. "He carried me through the fire when my legs failed. I thought he saved me because I was useful to him. But later, I learned he saved me simply because I was alive. Because he would not leave anyone behind. Even me, an alien, his enemy." The courtyard stirred with disbelief. A human soldier who had shown mercy? Who had risked his life for an alien princess? It sounded impossible. Yet the conviction in her eyes silenced doubt. "We fled together," she said. "Through forests, through ruined cities, through the emptiness of space. At first I feared him. I hated him. I wanted to run from him. But he gave me food when I starved. He built fires when the nights froze. He never raised his hand against me, though he had every chance." Her voice softened, her face breaking with emotion. "When nightmares woke me, he stayed awake so I could sleep. When enemies hunted us, he fought them so I could escape. And slowly, I realized he was not my enemy. He was my protector, my friend." A lump formed in her throat, but she forced the words out. "And then, he became more. He became my heart. Against every law, against every tradition, against every border that divided our worlds, I gave him my love. And he gave me his." The queen's lips parted in shock, her heart breaking again, this time with truth. The nobles muttered darkly, some turning their faces away as if the words poisoned them. But the princess stood firm. "From that love," she said, looking down at her son, "came Kale, my child. His blood is human. His blood is alien. But his soul is more than both. He is proof that peace is not a dream. He is proof that we do not have to be enemies." The boy looked up shyly when he heard his name, his wide eyes filled with innocence. He did not understand the weight of her words, but he felt her strength. The queen swayed where she stood. She could almost see the ghost of this human soldier, standing beside her daughter, carrying her through fire and death. She could almost hear his voice in the child's heartbeat. But not everyone saw hope. "This is blasphemy," one noble cried, his voice echoing off the palace walls. "She has betrayed our bloodline. She has betrayed our people. She speaks lies," another spat. "No human could do such things. Humans destroy, they do not love. She has been twisted by captivity." The princess lifted her chin, fire sparking in her eyes. Do you call me a liar? I lived these years. I bled these wounds. I carry his child. Would you deny the truth that stands before your eyes? The crowd shifted uneasily. Some murmured with doubt. Others looked at the boy with curiosity, not hatred. A few quietly began to wonder if perhaps she spoke truth, that maybe humans were not only monsters of war. The queen raised her hand, silencing them all. Her voice was quiet, yet it struck like thunder. My daughter speaks with her heart. I see no lies in her eyes. The nobles flinched, but the queen was not finished. She turned to her daughter. But one truth remains hidden. Where is this man, the one who saved you, who fathered this child? The princess froze. Her lips quivered. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of joy. He is gone, she whispered, her voice breaking. He gave his life for us. He died so Kale and I could live. Her voice cracked into silence. The courtyard went still. Even the nobles, bitter and angry, bowed their heads at the mention of sacrifice. The queen's hand touched her lips, her eyes wet with grief, not only for the years lost, but for the nameless human soldier who had given her back her daughter, and given her a grandson she never expected to love. And in the shadows of the court, new whispers rose, some of hope, some of hatred, and some of fear for the future that was now forever changed. The court's outrage, the princess's final words still hung heavy in the air. He died so Kale and I could live. The queen's chest ached as she repeated them in her mind. The silence of the courtyard was deep, but it did not last long. The nobles were the first to break it. Their voices rose like knives, sharp and furious. This is madness, one shouted, his golden cloak shaking as he pointed at the child. We cannot allow this half-human to remain in our palace. Your Majesty, another noblewoman said coldly, bowing low. With all respect, the princess has returned tainted. She carries human blood in her line. This boy will poison our future. The crowd stirred. Whispers spread through the citizens gathered at the gates. Some agreed, nodding with anger. Others looked uncertain, torn between loyalty to their queen and the fear of what this child represented. The queen lifted her hand for silence, but the nobles' voices only grew louder. Exile them both, shouted one. Send the boy away, demanded another. He is a danger to our people. The princess held Kale close, her body shielding him like a wall of steel. The child's small hands clutched her torn dress, his eyes wide with terror. He could not understand the words, but he felt the hate directed at him. His lips trembled, but he did not cry. The queen's jaw tightened. She turned to face her court. He is my blood, she said firmly, though her voice shook with pain. He is my grandson. Her words struck the courtyard like thunder. The nobles recoiled, but their outrage only deepened. Your Majesty, said the High Minister, a tall alien with sharp silver eyes. He bowed, but his voice was filled with venom. We honor your grief, and we honor the return of your daughter. But this child is not one of us. To accept him is to weaken the throne. To crown him family is to spit upon our history. The queen's face hardened. Her fingers trembled on her scepter, but her eyes burned. You dare question my bloodline? We question the stain of humanity, the minister replied, his voice echoing across the stones. This child carries their blood, their violence, their corruption. Do you forget the war? Do you forget the graves? A heavy silence followed. The people stirred uneasily. The war was still fresh in their memories. Burned villages, fallen soldiers, endless nights of fear. To them, humans were monsters, not saviors. The princess stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her cheeks glistened with tears. Do you also forget who saved me? A human, my son's father. He gave his life to protect us. Without him, I would not be here. Without him, Kyle would not breathe, the nobles jeered. Lies, one shouted. A trick. Another spat. Humans know only how to kill. The princess's eyes blazed with fire. And yet one gave his life for me. Will you deny my living proof? Will you call me a liar before my own mother? The queen raised her hand sharply, and the courtyard fell quiet again. Her face was unreadable. Inside, her heart was breaking. She was torn between the cries of her people and the pleas of her daughter. The High Minister bowed once more, but his words cut like blades. Your Majesty, if you accept this child, you risk everything. The nobles will not stand for it. The people will revolt. The throne itself may fall. The queen closed her eyes. She had led her people through war. She had carried the weight of an empire on her shoulders. But nothing had ever torn her soul like this moment. Her daughter looked at her with desperate eyes. "Mother, please. He is not our enemy. He is family." Kale peeked out from behind her dress, his small eyes meeting the Queen's. For a moment all she saw was innocence. He was just a boy. Not a soldier. Not a weapon. Just a child. But the shouts of the court rose again, filled with anger and fear. "Remove him. Protect the throne. Do not let this human blood poison us." The Queen turned to face her court. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the storm of voices. "You speak of poison. You speak of danger. But I see only a child who has done no wrong. You fear him because of his blood. But I tell you this, he carries courage, not corruption. He carries sacrifice, not shame. He carries the spirit of the soldier who gave me back my daughter." The courtyard grew silent again. The nobles did not speak, but their faces were masks of rage. They could not strike against their queen openly, but their eyes promised rebellion. Shadows gathered in their hearts like storm clouds on the horizon. The princess fell to her knees once more, clutching her son. Her tears struck the stones as she whispered, "Thank you, mother." The queen's hand trembled as she reached for her grandson again, brushing his dark hair from his eyes. She whispered so only he could hear, "You are mine. No matter what they say, you are mine." But even as she spoke, she felt the weight of the court's hatred pressing down. The palace itself seemed colder, its walls filled with silent threats. The boy's small eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw not just fear, but strength. Something burned in him, a spark perhaps of the father she had never known. And in the silence that followed, the queen realized a storm was coming. A storm not of war between races, but of war within her own kingdom. The human's legacy. The queen's words still echoed in the courtyard. "You are mine. No matter what they say, you are mine." But peace did not follow. The nobles' eyes were sharp with fire. The citizens outside the gates whispered like restless winds. Though the queen had spoken, many hearts still refused to accept the boy. Fear had already planted its seeds. The princess stood tall, her son clutched close, and her gaze swept across the angry faces. She knew silence would only feed their hatred. They needed to know the truth, not just of her child, but of the man who had given his life for him. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the noise. "You see only the child, but you do not see the man behind him. The one who gave him breath, the one who gave me back to you." The queen's eyes softened, but the nobles muttered in disapproval. Still, the princess did not waver. She stepped forward, her voice rising like a flame. "His name was Darius," she said, her words trembling with memory. "A soldier of the human armies. You call his kind monsters, but I tell you he was not. When others hunted me, he shielded me. When hunger gnawed at me, he gave me the last of his food. When darkness surrounded me, he became my light." She paused, her throat tight. The boy's small hand tugged at her sleeve as if encouraging her to go on. "Darius did not see me as alien," she continued, her eyes fierce. "He saw me as a life worth saving. He carried me across deserts where even he almost fell. He fought beasts, soldiers, and fire itself. He did not ask for reward. He asked only that I live." The crowd stirred. Some scoffed, unwilling to believe. Others grew quiet, the picture in their minds shaking their hatred. The queen leaned forward, her voice trembling. "And how? Did he die?" The princess's eyes filled with tears. Her hand gripped Kale tightly, as if the memory itself might rip him from her arms. "It was the last battle," she whispered. "We were surrounded. Enemies closed in from every side. I could barely walk, and Kale was still only a baby in my arms. Darius knew we could not both escape, so he gave me the only chance. He stood against them alone." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to go on. "He fought until the sky itself burned. He fought with every breath, every drop of blood, until he had nothing left. And when the last enemy fell upon him, he did not call for help. He smiled at me. He told me to run. He told me to live." The queen's hand shook as tears streamed down her face. For the first time, she wept not only for her daughter, but for the man she had never known, the human soldier who had died so she could embrace her child again. The princess knelt, her tears falling onto the stones. Darius's body never returned. His grave is the battlefield, but his spirit lives here, in Kale. Every time my son smiles, I see his father's courage. Every time he speaks, I hear his father's kindness. He is gone, but his legacy breathes through his child. Kyle, shy and small, looked up at his mother with wide eyes. He did not understand every word, but he felt her sorrow. He wrapped his tiny arms around her neck, whispering softly, "Don't cry, Mama." The simple words struck the Queen's heart like lightning. She stepped forward, unable to stop herself, and touched the boy's hair again. For a moment she saw not a human, not an alien, but her grandson, born from love, from sacrifice, from a bond that defied the cruelty of war. But the nobles were not moved. Their voices rose again, filled with venom. A touching tale. One sneered, "But stories do not change blood. Do you not see, Majesty?" The High Minister pressed, bowing low but his voice sharp. "This child will divide us. If you honor the legacy of a human, you dishonor every soldier who died fighting them." The Queen's jaw clenched. Her eyes blazed, but doubt gnawed at her. She wanted to shout that they were wrong. She wanted to protect Kale with all her might. Yet the truth was heavy. Her kingdom stood on a knife's edge. The princess rose again, fire in her voice. "You call him poison. I call him hope. You call his father an enemy. I call him a savior." Darius was more than human. He was proof that peace is possible. And Kale is that proof made flesh. Her words rang through the air like a challenge. Some of the people murmured in agreement now, swayed by her passion. Others still clung to fear. The Queen lifted her scepter, silencing them all. "Enough!" she thundered. Her tears had dried. Her voice was steady as steel. "You forget yourselves. My daughter has spoken her truth. Her child is not an enemy. He is family, he is mine. You will not touch him." The courtyard froze. Even the nobles dared not speak further. But their faces burned with silent rage. In the shadows of the great palace, hidden from the Queen's sight, servants and soldiers exchanged nervous looks. Whispers spread like smoke. If the Queen stood against her court, rebellion might rise. The princess knelt again, pressing her forehead to the Queen's feet. "Thank you, Mother, for him. For me?" The Queen touched her daughter's hair, but her eyes lingered on the boy. Kale looked up at her, uncertain but unafraid. And in his eyes she thought she saw something. Courage far older than his years. Perhaps, she wondered, the boy truly did carry the legacy of his father. But as the torches flickered in the cold night air, the Queen also knew this. Darius's sacrifice had saved them once. But now it was Kale's very existence that might tear the kingdom apart. And somewhere beyond the walls, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the chance to strike at the weakness within the throne. The child's test. The Queen's declaration still echoed through the courtyard. "He is mine. You will not touch him." The nobles had fallen into bitter silence, but their anger had not faded. The people outside the gates were torn between awe and fear. And in the middle of it all, the princess held Kale close, her heart pounding with both relief and dread. Then the sky cracked with thunder. The ground shook beneath their feet. From beyond the walls of the palace, alarms blared. Soldiers on the ramparts shouted, their voices sharp with fear. Shadows moved in the darkness beyond the city gates. An enemy force had come. The Queen's guards rushed forward, forming a line before her. "Your Majesty, the city is under attack," one shouted. The Queen's face hardened, her tears vanishing as duty claimed her once more. She turned to her generals. "Defend the capital. No enemy must breach these walls." The nobles panicked, their anger forgotten for the moment. Some fled into the inner chambers, their jeweled robes fluttering like frightened birds. Others barked orders to their own private guards. The courtyard, already heavy with tension, became a storm of fear and chaos. The princess held Kale tighter, pressing him against her chest. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No matter what happens." But Kale, though small, did not bury his face in her dress this time. His wide eyes looked toward the walls where fire and smoke began to rise. He did not cry. He did not run. Something inside him stirred, a spark of the man he had never met but carried in his blood. The enemy struck quickly. Explosions rocked the outer gates, sending stone crashing down. Soldiers fought bravely, but the attackers poured through like a flood. Their armor gleamed under the moonlight, their weapons sharp with hate. Screams filled the night. The Queen raised her scepter, her voice ringing above the chaos. "Hold your ground. Protect the palace." The princess clutched Kale and began to move toward the inner halls, but the boy pulled at her sleeve. "Mama, wait, we can't hide." Her eyes widened. "Kyle, you must stay with me." But the boy shook his head. His small hands clenched into fists. "Papa didn't hide. He fought to protect us." The princess's heart shattered at his words. Tears filled her eyes, but she saw the same fire in Cale that had once burned in Darius. He was only a child, but his courage was real. Before she could answer, the enemy breached the courtyard itself. Flames lit the night sky as soldiers clashed on the palace steps. The queen's guards fought desperately, but the attackers pressed hard. One soldier, larger than the rest, broke through the line and charged straight toward the princess and her son. The princess screamed, holding Cale close. She had no weapon, no strength left to fight. But Cale moved. He grabbed a fallen guard's dagger, its blade almost too heavy for his small hands. With a cry, he stood in front of his mother, raising it high. His arms shook, but his eyes blazed with defiance. The attacker laughed cruelly, raising his sword to strike. But in that moment, Cale did something unexpected. He darted forward, not with strength, but with speed. He sliced at the soldier's leg just enough to make him stumble. The enemy fell to one knee, and the queen's guard seized the chance to strike him down. The courtyard froze for a moment. All eyes turned to the boy, the small human child who had faced a warrior without fear. The princess gasped, her hands covering her mouth. The queen's eyes widened, her heart thundering. Even the nobles hidden in the shadows were silent with shock. Cale dropped the dagger, his tiny hands trembling. He looked back at his mother, his eyes wide, not with fear but with determination. "I won't let them hurt you, Mama. I won't." The princess fell to her knees, pulling him into her arms. Her tears soaked his hair as she whispered, "You are your father's son." The queen stepped forward slowly, her gaze locked on the boy. She had seen courage in many forms, soldiers, generals, even kings, but never had she seen it in one so young. In that moment, Cale was no longer just a human child. He was a warrior's legacy. The enemy pressed again, but the tide began to turn. The guards, inspired by the boy's courage, fought with renewed strength. "For the queen," they cried. "For the princess." Blow by blow, the attackers were driven back. The courtyard filled with smoke and fire, but slowly the enemy retreated, their shadows vanishing into the night. When silence finally returned, the palace stood scarred but unbroken. The queen's people gathered again, shaken and bruised but alive, and there, in the center of the courtyard, stood Cale, small, trembling, but unyielding. The queen approached him, her voice soft but clear. "You saved us tonight, little one." Cale looked down at his hands. They were shaking, his palms blistered from holding the dagger. I was scared," he whispered. The queen knelt, lifting his chin so his eyes met hers. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is standing, even when fear tries to break you. Tonight you carried the spirit of your father. Tonight you carried the hope of two worlds. The princess held her son close, pride shining in her eyes. The crowd, though still divided, began to see something different in the boy. Some whispered words of respect. Others bowed their heads in silence. But among the nobles, anger burned hotter than ever. If the boy's courage could win the people's hearts, their power would be threatened. In the shadows, their plots grew darker. The queen looked at her court, her voice steady. "This child is not our weakness. He is our strength, and I will protect him with all I have." The torches flickered in the wind, and for a brief moment hope glowed within the palace walls. But beneath that glow, the seeds of rebellion were already taking root. A new future, the smoke of battle still lingered in the courtyard. The stones were blackened, the air heavy with ash, and the cries of the wounded echoed faintly from the gates. Yet the palace still stood. The queen's banner still flew above its towers, and in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by soldiers and nobles, stood a child. Cale's small body trembled with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with quiet strength. The memory of his bravery, of how he had faced a soldier twice his size without fear, hung in every heart that had witnessed it. The queen looked at her court. Their jeweled robes were scorched with dust, their proud faces shaken. Some looked at Cale with new respect. Others still glared, their hatred unchanged. She could read the truth in their eyes. Some hearts were opening, but others would never accept him. The princess knelt beside her son, brushing soot from his hair. She whispered gently, "You were so brave, Cale. Your father would be proud." Cale leaned into her, tired but smiling faintly. "I didn't want to let them hurt you, Mama, or Grandma." The word struck the queen like an arrow. Grandma. For a moment, her heart softened beyond words. She stepped closer, her robes trailing through the ash, and placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. Tonight you proved yourself, she said softly, so that all could hear. You are not a curse. You are not a danger. You are a flame, small but strong enough to burn away fear. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded, others shook their heads. The High Minister stepped forward, his face pale with fury. Your Majesty, he said, bowing stiffly, you cannot ignore what has happened. Yes, the child struck a blow, but he is still human-blooded. He will divide the kingdom. If you crown him family, you will lose the noble's loyalty. The Queen turned slowly to face him. Her eyes, though weary, blazed with fire. If loyalty depends on hatred of a child, then I would rather rule alone. The courtyard fell into silence. Even the minister flinched beneath her gaze. The princess rose, clutching Kale's hand, her voice rising with passion. Look at him. He is not a threat, he is hope. He carries my blood, and he carries the courage of his father. He fought when grown men turned away. He saved lives tonight. Can you not see? He is the bridge between us and them. Between war and peace, between despair and tomorrow. Her words rang like a bell. The soldiers who had fought beside Kale nodded slowly, some striking their chests in respect. A few citizens cried out from beyond the gates. The boy saved us. Honor him. The Queen lifted her scepter high. Her voice thundered across the courtyard. From this night forward, Kale shall be recognized as my grandson. He will live under my protection within these walls. Whoever dares raise a hand against him raises a hand against the throne itself. The people gasped. Some cheered. Others murmured in anger. The nobles bowed stiffly, their eyes dark with unspoken rebellion. The High Minister clenched his fists, his jaw tight with fury. But the Queen did not flinch. She looked down at Kale, her voice soft again. You are family, and you will not walk in shadows. You will walk in light. Kyle's small hand squeezed hers, and he smiled for the first time that night. His eyes shone like stars in the darkness. The princess wept with relief, pressing her forehead to her mother's shoulder. For years she had carried the weight of fear, the fear that her son would never be accepted. Tonight, at least, she felt hope. But beneath the cheers of some and the whispers of others, a storm still gathered. In the shadows of the palace, the nobles who had lost power whispered among themselves. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. The Queen's decision had saved her family, but it had planted the seeds of rebellion. The Queen knew it. She felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. Yet when she looked at her daughter and grandson, she also felt something stronger, something brighter. Hope. The night drew to a close. The fires of battle were put out, and the wounded were carried inside. The people slowly returned to their homes, whispering of what they had seen. Some spoke of fear, others of pride, and above the city the stars glittered, silent witnesses to history. The Queen stood tall, her daughter at her side, her grandson before her. She held their hands, one in each of hers, and together they walked back into the palace. For the first time in years, the Queen's steps felt lighter. She did not know what the future would bring. There would be challenges. There would be battles, not of swords but of hearts. Yet she believed something new had begun that night. A new age. An age where hatred could be broken. An age where love could defy tradition. An age where one small child, half human, half alien, might hold the power to change everything. And as the Queen closed the great palace doors behind her, she whispered into the night, words meant only for the stars. Darius, I never knew you, but your son will not be forgotten. He will live. He will lead. And through him, your legacy will burn forever. The torches dimmed, the city quieted, and the story of Kyle, the boy who carried two worlds in his blood, was only just beginning.